blessed morning to all the administrators, faculty, and personnel of the CEAP member schools all over the Philippines. Happy Catholic Schools Week! Welcome to the second day of the 2021 JEEPGY Conference. I am Marianne Cruz, the Deputy Executive Director of CEAP, and I will be your moderator for today. Yesterday, we had a session for ecological integrity with a session on climate neutrality. Today, our session will be on justice and peace, and we will be listening to sharings on the Catholic Nonviolence initiatives. Before we continue, let us begin our webinar with an opening prayer. And we remember that we are in the holy presence of God as we make the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Allow me to lead you in the prayer of Saint Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good morning once again. For those who just tuned in with us, we welcome you to the second session of the 2021 CEAP JEEPGY National Conference. We are live both on the CEAP Facebook page and the CEAP channel on YouTube. And we will continue to deliver our webinars for the week on these two platforms. If you have not done so yet, we ask you to like this webinar by pressing the thumbs up button below and subscribe on our YouTube CEAP channel. Now go ahead and press that red button so that you will be informed of all the webinars for the week. Remember, like, subscribe, and share so that others may benefit also from the webinars that we offer in the CEAP during this 2021 JEEPGY conference. Now for some reminders. First, as the talk is ongoing, we encourage you to post your questions or comments at the comment section on Facebook and YouTube. Tell us where you are watching from, and we will ask your questions and read your comments during the question and answer portion. Second, we get a lot of queries about certificates. Please be informed that you will receive the certificate of attendance only upon the completion of the evaluation form. The link has already been posted as part of the caption of this video, both on YouTube and on Facebook. But please note that the link will only go live from 11:30 in the morning until 5 p.m. today. So if you click it now, nothing is going to happen. We encourage you to answer the evaluation form, and you will receive your certificate of attendance within the next 3 to 5 days. Also, please be informed that this is a free webinar brought to you in partnership with the Private Education Assistance Committee, or the PEAC. Thank you, PEAC, for your generosity. Again, this is a free webinar. So if people are asking for your credit cards to register, please, that is not CEAP. Lastly, we encourage you to share this webinar to your networks with the hashtags, hashtag CEAP Cares, hashtag I Love Catholic Ed, and hashtag I Love CEAP. Now, let's get ready for the session. The title of this webinar is Nonviolence for the Next Generation. We have a panel of 4 speakers, local and international, and they will present the Catholic Nonviolence Initiatives, a project that promotes active nonviolence and just peace as a way of life and draws inspiration from the life and teachings of Jesus, our great teacher. Among other things, the project hopes that the Catholic schools would appreciate this mission and be channels through which these principles are lived and advocated. Now, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker will tell us what nonviolence is, why there is a need for it, what is the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, why Catholic schools are important in promoting nonviolence. Let me introduce her now. She is an author and co-author of 7 books and has published numerous articles on nonviolence, just peace, and care for creation for over 40 years and has been a frequent speaker for Catholic community events. She was one of the primary organizers of the April 2016 Conference on Nonviolence and Just Peace that was co-sponsored by the Vatican and Pax Christi International, and another one, I think in 2018. And she will tell you more about this during her presentation. She worked for Marinol from 1989 to 2012, primarily as the director of the Marinol Office for Global Concerns. She holds a master's degree in moral theology from Washington Theological Union and honorary doctorates from Trinity Washington University and Alvernia University. She was co-president of Pax Christi from 2007 to 2019 and serves on the executive committee on Pax Christi's Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, as well as on the Vatican's COVID-19 Commission. Let us welcome with a virtual round of applause the senior advisor to the Secretary General of Pax Christi International, Miss Marie Dennis.
Thank you very much, Marianne. It's very nice to be with all of you this morning. The Catholic Nonviolence Initiative is a project of Pax Christi International, as Marianne said, that began with a few simple questions. What if 1.3 billion Catholics worldwide had a full understanding of the power and effectiveness of active nonviolence and the connection of nonviolence to the heart of the gospel? What if we all knew how to apply nonviolent tools to diffuse conflict before it came violent? What if the Catholic Church committed its channels of communication and diplomacy, its vast spiritual, intellectual, and financial resources to promoting active nonviolence? What if Catholic schools, colleges, universities, seminaries integrated programs on nonviolence and just peace into their curricula, their research, and their community outreach efforts? These questions were discussed at a small conference on nonviolence and just peace that was held in Rome in 2016. Co-sponsored by the co-sponsored by the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace and Pax Christi International. Among the 80 participants were many people living in contexts of violence and war, from Iraq and Afghanistan, Palestine and Uganda, South Sudan and Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, Sri Lanka, and more. Many participants, including from the Philippines, had deep experience with effective nonviolence under extremely challenging circumstances. What they shared with us in those few days helped us to think much more deeply about the nature of violence, which is often overt and direct, but is also structural, systemic, and cultural. Racism is violence. So is environmental destruction, political repression, apartheid, economic injustice. In those days, we also developed a deeper, more nuanced and complex understanding of nonviolence as well, as an option that is active, not passive, and much more than pacifism, which works to stop repression and violence, but also to promote social justice, human dignity, and a healthy planet. Nonviolence is a spirituality, a way of life, a global ethic, and a diverse set of tools for interrupting violence, for transforming conflict, for promoting social justice and ecological integrity. In Jesus' own times, rife with both direct and structural violence, he proclaimed a new nonviolent order rooted in the unconditional love of God. He taught his disciples to love their enemies and to turn the other cheek. When he stopped her accusers from stoning the woman caught in adultery, and when, on the night before he died, he told Peter to put away his sword, Jesus, as Pope Francis said, marked out the path of nonviolence. He walked that path to the very end, to the cross, whereby he became our peace and put an end to hostility. Neither passive nor weak, Jesus' nonviolence was the power of love in action. In vision and in deed, he is the revelation and the embodiment of the nonviolent God. Nonviolent violence is absolutely antithetical to his word and his witness. Those of us who gathered at the 2016 conference specifically appealed to the Catholic Church, first, to further develop Catholic social teaching on nonviolence, to integrate gospel nonviolence into the life and the work of the Church, to promote the development of nonviolent practices and strategies, to move the just war tradition even further into the background of Catholic teaching, and to lift up the prophetic voices of peacemakers and nonviolent activists around the world. We specifically asked Pope Francis to write an encyclical on nonviolence. Out of that conference, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative grew as a project of Pax Christi International, as did an Orbis book called Choosing Peace that told the stories we had heard during that conference. We were delighted when Pope Francis wrote his 2017 World Day of Peace message on nonviolence, a style of politics for peace. And we have been in constant dialogue with the Vatican, primarily with the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development since then. During 2017 and 2018, 5 virtual Catholic Nonviolence Initiative roundtables engaged theologians and peace practitioners from around the world, about 120 people all told, in regular reflection on different aspects of nonviolence, including a systematic or foundational theology of nonviolence, scriptural exegesis on nonviolence, a new moral framework based on nonviolence, examples of nonviolence applied by Catholic communities in very different contexts around the world, and proposals for how the Church, the Catholic Church, could integrate nonviolence into its life and mission. The results of these roundtables, which were multinational, gender balanced, and virtual, formed the basis of a second conference, which was also co-sponsored by the Vatican, this time by the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, and gathered about 80 people again from around the world in Rome. That conference was held in 2019. The roundtable results and the second conference reflections are collected in a book recently published by Pax Christi International called Advancing Nonviolence and Just Peace in the Church and the World. As I mentioned, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative has been in very regular dialogue with the Vatican, both directly and by contributing to several Vatican-sponsored conferences on nuclear disarmament, on cybersecurity, on the anniversary of Caritas in Veritate, and on other occasions. And most recently, by very actively participating in the Vatican's COVID-19 Commission, most particularly in the Security Task Force. We've also been in quite regular ongoing conversation with local churches through religious congregations, a number of bishops and bishops' conferences, and several international organizations such as Caritas, Jesuit Refugee Service, and CRS. Especially gratifying has been the response of Catholic universities in a number of countries that have co-sponsored or sponsored conferences and symposia, have added nonviolence specifically to peace studies curricula, and have begun to identify research topics that could contribute to an evidence base for applying active nonviolence in a variety of particular contexts. The Catholic Nonviolence Initiative has also either developed or discovered some wonderful resources to engage local communities, schools, and parishes in learning more about and creatively promoting nonviolence in your own situation, in your own context. The Catholic Nonviolence Days of Action in September and early October began in 2020, just a few months ago, but will be an annual event to encourage creative thinking about how to be nonviolent as we act for justice and protect the planet in many different contexts around the world. Finally, we're about to publish an initial tool for policymakers to help political leaders at every level, local, national, and international, to understand how public policies can help move our societies from perpetually turning to weapons and violence to deal with conflict, and instead to invest in developing and scaling up nonviolent tools like diplomacy, unarmed civilian protection, restorative justice, trauma healing, well-planned and well-organized civil resistance, even humor in the cause of achieving justice and just peace. Hopefully, that gives you an initial picture of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. A more complete picture of CNI and links to the many resources we've created together can be discovered on our website, which is nonviolencejustpeace.net. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marie Dennis, for that very informative talk on the Catholic Nonviolence Initiatives. We move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is someone very familiar to us. Cookie natin ito. And she will talk to us about creating a nonviolent learning environment, the case of Miriam College. She was the chairperson of the CEAP Subcommittee on Justice and Peace for more than 10 years until her appointment as vice president in her institution in 2019. She continues to work with CEAP, though, through the Technical Working Group of the Philippine Catholic School Standards for Higher Education, or the PCSSHE, which we hope to launch this year, our 80th year. She is with the board of the Global Network for Women Peace Builders, the International Advisory Council of the International Action Network on Small Arms, and the facilitation team of Pax Christi Asia Pacific. She also supports the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, or ICAN, through her work at the Center for Peace Education, as well as the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative through her work in its subcommittee on education. She's an associate at the Center for Peace Education, where she used to be the executive director in Miriam College and a professor at the Department of International Studies and the College of Education, also at Miriam College. Let us welcome, with a resounding virtual applause, the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Miriam College, Dr. Jasmin Nario-Galace. Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Man, for the generous introduction. I wish to share with you today the experience of Miriam College in creating a nonviolent learning environment. First off, why create a nonviolent learning environment? We are aware that violence is pervasive in society. Wars, for example, have killed more than 100 million in the 20th century, and this number does not include yet those who perished from criminal violence, domestic violence, terrorism, political violence, clan wars, or drug-related violence. Our schools are not spared from violence, and this slide tells us that students from our own schools have died from bullying, suicide, and hazing. Records indicate that 46 students have died from hazing incidents in the Philippines, which continue to occur among members of fraternity organizations generally. And last year, social media was flooded with reports from students about predatory behavior and sexual harassment at the hands of faculty that resulted to cries from students and alumni that schools protect their students. Our schools have also become an arena for aggressive behavior, intentionally and repeatedly done, that create physical or psychological harm. In this era of online learning, offenders use electronic devices and social media platforms to verbally and emotionally assault another. Yes, violence happens in our schools. Students and other members have been killed or injured, have experienced profound pain and trauma, have compromised their opportunity to succeed because of experiences of violence, whether sexual, physical, or psychological. Hence, steps must be taken to create a learning environment that is nonviolent and safe. Often, we are asked to trace the roots of any problem before we offer solutions. Where does violence come from? There are offered explanations from various disciplines, as you know, political science, sociology, psychology. One thing we know for sure, though, is that if we do not agree that violence is a learned behavior, then attempts at raising nonviolent individuals are exercises in futility. So these offered explanations are more in line with Bandura's social learning theory, which considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence learning and behavior. So what can schools do? Our invitation is for us to cultivate and nurture nonviolent thinking, dispositions, attitudes, values, and behaviors through a whole school approach. In previous JEEPGY and CEAP seminars, I have spoken about the whole school approach. Our invitation is for us to nurture nonviolent individuals using all the facets of the school or aspects of school life, such as our policies, curriculum, programs, structures, and research. I will share with you this morning how we use the whole school approach at Miriam College in developing nonviolent perspectives, dispositions, and behaviors. First facet, our curriculum. To nurture nonviolent individuals, let us teach nonviolence. We can infuse peace and nonviolence concepts, values, and skills into our subjects in the BEU and courses in the HEU. On screen, you will see a schema of KSAs that will help nurture nonviolence. Values that are most consistent with nonviolence, for example, are respect for others and for life, as well as justice and compassion. And skills most consistent with nurturing nonviolent individuals would be the skills of conflict resolution and communication. I thought I'd share with you some key messages that, to my mind, would help cultivate nonviolent perspectives. Some of these are: destruction is not the law of humans. Biology does not condemn us to war. War is not inevitable. There is a statement made in Seville, Spain in 1986 where scientists and scholars put forward that biology does not condemn us to war, that it is scientifically incorrect to say that war or any other violent behavior is genetically programmed into our human nature. While genes are involved at all levels of the nervous system function, they provide a developmental potential that can be actualized only in conjunction with the ecological and social environment. On screen are other key messages that may help develop nonviolent perspectives. We can prevent violent conflict from happening. Life is sacred and an absolute value and hence must be respected. All humans are equal in worth and dignity. Yes, all humans, regardless of ethnicity, race, color, socioeconomic status, appearance, and others. All humans are brothers and sisters who share a common home. Most divisions are socially and culturally constructed. Differences are meant to enrich us, not divide us, and humans have the potential to change. Another way to teach nonviolence is to offer a separate course on peace education and on nonviolence. On screen, you will see some examples of course offerings in Miriam College HEU. One is the Introduction to Peace Studies. Another is Theory and Practice of Nonviolence. Both we offer under the Department of International Studies. You may want to offer the same. CHED Memorandum Order Number 1, Series of 2019, after all, enjoins all public and private higher education institutions to offer peace studies or peace education in their respective curricula, and for HEIs who are already doing so to assist by training potential peace educators. This is why Miriam College's College of Education offers a certificate course on conflict resolution and peace education. How else can we nurture nonviolent individuals? We can use teaching and learning approaches and methods that are consistent with the principles of nonviolence: cooperative, holistic, humanist, dialogical, participatory. Cooperative learning gives opportunities for learners to work together rather than compete. Many of the problems in the world we face right now can be solved if people would cooperate. If learners would experience cooperative processes in the classrooms, such habit could be brought by them in the outside world. In a humanistic classroom, on the other hand, learners are accepted for what they are. It helps promote a sense of self-esteem and sends the message that all are valuable and gifted. Teachers in a humanistic classroom are empathetic and affirming. They show concern for the well-being of their students. They encourage in the classroom care and respect for each other. They also encourage sensitivity to diversity in the classroom. Such approach will help breed in learners the seeds of compassion and kindness, values that are necessary in building a nonviolent society. Is your classroom humanistic? Here are some examples of how we can teach nonviolence. We can discuss women and men of nonviolence like Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Lema Bowie, as those who are normally glorified in our textbooks and other instructional materials from history to literature are war heroes. We can use films, poems, stories, songs to teach peace, respect for diversity, and nonviolence. Some of my favorite films are Gandhi, Pray the Devil Back to Hell, Hotel Rwanda, Pocahontas, The Jungle Book, Pay It Forward. For songs, I normally use Colors of the Wind, One Day, Blowing in the Wind, Firework, And some songs might actually surprise you with the brilliance of their messages. Take, for example, the song Isang Pipit. Are you familiar with the song? If you are, let's recite the lyrics. I know that you're on Facebook Live, but let's recite the lyrics together. May pumukol sa pipit sa sanga ng isang kahoy at nahagip ng bato ang pakpak ng munting ibon. Dahil sa sakit, di na nakaya pang lumipad at ang nangyari ay nahulog ngunit parang taong bumigkas. Mamang kay lupit, ang puso mo'y di na nahabag. Pag pumanaw ang buhay ko, may isang pipit na iiyak. We can ask our students, from preschool to HEU, what does this song tell you? I wish you were all here in the Zoom room so that you can type your answers in the chat box. But I know you're all on Facebook watching, and I'm sure there are many messages that are in your mind right now. What other strategies can we use? We can do research, like on successful nonviolent uprisings. We can interview people who help prevent conflict or wars in a nonviolent resistance. We can do textbook analysis of, for example, what photos, what words in our textbooks glorify violence. We can do letter writing to people who can stop violence. We can put up exhibits on people of nonviolence or nonviolent revolutions. We can invite resource persons who are from different ethnic, socioeconomic, and religious backgrounds to talk about their work for peace through nonviolence. We can provide opportunities for students to interact with people they perceive to be different. Or we can play games, changing violent idioms and phrases to nonviolent ones. And I'd like to show you an example in the next screen. So these are violent expressions in everyday conversations, but why the fuss about language? It's because language shapes consciousness. The use of violent words can make us more combative. If I say this, and listen, they targeted, took aim, opened fire, attacked, and counterattacked. You would think that I was describing an armed conflict, right? But these very same words can be used by a sportscaster in a basketball or football game, or by a journalist who is describing a debate of political candidates. They targeted, took aim, opened fire, attacked, and counterattacked. They're becoming to be, language in everyday conversations. We have also allowed language to soften the impact of violence. We call many deaths in wars collateral damage, for example. But try saying that to the parents or children of those who have died. So let's call out the use of violent jargon in our own and our learners' vocabulary. Look at the violent expressions on screen. Discuss in a language class an alternative to these violent phrases. I will give you a favorite example. Column 2.3, notice that I didn't say bullet. Instead of saying, let's kill 2 birds with 1 stone, we can say, let's light 2 candles with 1 matchstick. So, 3, let us cultivate nonviolent dispositions through enrichment programs for students, parents, faculty, and staff. At Miriam College, we do peace education training for our faculty, peer mediation and conflict resolution training for our students, something we consistently do in the Miriam College High School, parenting for peace, challenging bullying seminars, restorative discipline seminars for our faculty, nurturing a peaceable workplace for our non-teaching staff, active nonviolence for our partner communities, and legal talks on safe space, creating a safer learning environment for all members of our community. We also have a Peace Corps group within the school, the Peace Associates, who learn, plan, and work together to nurture nonviolent and peaceful dispositions amongst members of the Miriam College community. 4, we may adopt peace-oriented policies. In the Miriam College mission and vision, peace is a core value. In our Zone of Peace declaration, a photo you can see on screen, we declared commitment to carry out in our school the love and example of Jesus and Mary by refusing to inflict harm or injury to others, by finding ways to resolve our conflicts constructively, by pursuing cooperative rather than aggressively competitive activities. Miriam College also has adopted a restorative discipline policy after a community discussion of what punitive measures do. How can we help both the offended and the offender such that both can be restored to a state of well-being? Conflicts often arise in the school setting, and it is important to shift thinking away from punishment towards a restorative approach, which is consistent with an education that values all learners and seek their transformation. After all, Jesus came for the lost sheep. Why can't we do the same? 5, we can encourage research and release publications that contribute to knowledge on protecting students from violence, as well as developing dispositions and capabilities for the building of nonviolent communities. On screen, you will see photos of some of our peace-focused publications. MC also has a peace section in our library and has peace and interfaith gardens. 6, we can develop programs and organize projects that will help cultivate nonviolent dispositions and protect members of our community from violence. Our Miriam College Lower School Guidance Office, for example, has an anti-bullying program, which activities include information dissemination, parent-teacher newsletter on bullying, anti-bullying workshop for bus drivers, conductors, and owners, a buddy bench program that allows students to sit down on a bench to relax and meet friends. It's a safe space for them to be themselves. Here are photos of projects from our twinning project with a school attended by Muslims, our Interfaith Harmony Week, our Mindanao Solidarity Week, our Nuclear Abolition Week, our Wear Orange Day, Global Action Against Gun Violence, our International Day of Peace, our International Day of Nonviolence, that are all meant to help cultivate nonviolent dispositions amongst members of the Miriam College community. In our Miriam College Lower School, they have the Think Safe campaign, where students are taught to speak up, act calmly, find help, and educate themselves in the face of threat to safety and security. In the Miriam College Middle School, they also have various initiatives to challenge bullying, as you can see on screen. They also have a Values Are Cool program that involves the home in discussing an assigned value such as nonviolence. Students discuss with families, for example, how they can resolve conflicts constructively and peacefully in the home. 7, create structures and processes that will help facilitate an environment of peace and nonviolence. Democratic processes in the discharge of various functions are observed in the school, nomination process in the choice of school leaders. We have democratic processes available to help resolve conflicts or address violence. For example, we have the Child Protection Committee, the Anti-Sexual Harassment Committee, the Committee on Decorum and Investigation, Committee on Anti-Bullying, Employee Discipline Committee. And then we had advocacy centers like the Center for Peace Education, the Women and Gender Institute, and the Environmental Studies Institute, as well as the Center for Child Protection. 8, we can create opportunities for participation in advocacy and campaign work for peace through nonviolence. Our students have participated in lobby and campaign work for the adoption of the Bangsamoro Organic Law, knowing how important peace processes are in ending armed conflicts. They helped in the lobby for an arms trade treaty in the United Nations, gathering signatures in malls, parks, churchyards, and other public places that contributed to the number of signatories to a petition calling for the adoption of the treaty in the UN. They were also active in the lobby for the adoption of treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, campaigned for women's greater participation in leadership and decision-making processes that affect peace and security in community and national levels. They join in campaigns against gun violence or death penalty. They have joined public actions against violence. Here are some photos of their advocacy and campaigns work. Finally, we can nurture nonviolent individuals if we are nonviolent ourselves. Are we the change we want to see in this world? Are we good role models? There is a need for us to acknowledge our violence. Let's go through this list together and ask ourselves, do I make others suffer with my words and ways? Or have I yelled at others for mistakes that they made? Have I called them names like stupid or dumb? Do I stand with and defend those who suffer from violence? Do I speak up against violence? Or do I turn a blind eye when people are killed? Do I solve my conflicts constructively? Are my channels of communication open? Or do I harbor the hate with a plan to bring it to the afterlife? Do I respect diversity? Or do I belittle women's capacities? Or label Muslim terrorists? Or call all poor people thieves? Am I gentle, kind, caring, and compassionate towards others? Am I respectful of the ideas of others? Am I a bearer of hope rather than despair? Earlier in this presentation, I shared that we create a nonviolent learning environment because people have been killed or injured within school settings, have experienced profound pain and trauma, have compromised their opportunity to succeed because of experiences of violence, whether sexual, physical, or psychological. Dear educators, we need to raise nonviolent humans and create a nonviolent learning environment because that was how Jesus lived his life and taught us all along. Love your enemies, return good for evil, do good to those who hate you, put back your sword where it belongs, turn the other cheek. Those who have not sinned, cast the first stone. If Jesus taught us to be nonviolent and led a nonviolent life, why shouldn't we? And our lives and our classrooms are the best starting points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Galace, for that usual spirited presentation of your nonviolence initiatives at Miriam College. Our next speaker, who will speak about the initiatives of Catholic schools in promoting the Catholic Nonviolence Initiatives, a virtue ethic for Catholic social teaching, teaches at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. in Justice and Peace Studies. His most recent book is an edited volume called A Just Peace Ethic Primer, Breaking Cycles of Violence and Building Sustainable Peace, which he published just last year. He also published Becoming Nonviolent Peacemakers, a virtue ethic for Catholic social teaching and U.S. policy. back in 2012. For 8 years, he served as the Director of Justice and Peace for CMSM, which is the leadership conference of all the U.S. Catholic men's religious orders. This enabled him direct advocacy experience on influencing U.S. policy. He presently serves on Catholic Nonviolence Initiative's steering committee and chairs the CNI Education Committee. He also coordinates the DC Peace Team, which offers training in nonviolent communication, restorative justice, bystander intervention, along with providing unarmed civilian protection and accompaniment deployments. Let us welcome the chairperson of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative's Education Committee, Dr. Eli McCarthy. A virtual round of applause for Dr. Eli.
It's wonderful to be with you all this morning. What wonderful conversations and presentations we've heard so far. I'm going to share a little bit about the role of education in the development of key virtues related to nonviolence, as well as how university and educational structures can help cultivate the praxis of nonviolence. And I really look forward to your insights as well during our discussion. Virtue ethics implies that the human person is oriented toward a human good, end, or telos. Most virtue ethicists offer a broad, complex, comprehensive, and inclusive understanding of the human good. Thus, not all, but many forms of life, cultures, and ways of embodying the virtues seem compatible with the human telos. Further, our understanding of the human good or telos will change and develop during our journey. So in virtue ethics, the human good or the end is often described as human flourishing or excellence. Flourishing entails a life lived in accord with virtue and participation in virtuous relationships. And being virtuous means having a set of related virtues that enable a person to live and act morally well, not simply to do a morally good action. So when I think about virtue, I'm thinking of a disposition to act, desire, feel in a way that leads to an instance of human flourishing. So oriented by the Gospels, a virtue-based approach can help us to focus on developing the character, healthy habits, virtue, and corresponding practices of a nonviolent just peace approach. Thus, we will be better motivated and prepared to creatively imagine nonviolent ways to transform conflict, to choose and to sustain those ways through difficult situations. A virtue-based just peace approach will better equip us to transform not only direct violence, but also cultural violence, and thus will impact structural violence. Further, it would also cultivate persons who would better marginalize and delegitimate the use of violence or lethal force. I want to highlight the need for a distinct and central virtue of nonviolent peacemaking, which I explained in my book, Becoming Nonviolent Peacemakers. Identifying nonviolence as a virtue is also consistent with non-Catholics such as Gandhi and Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the famous Muslim nonviolent leader, but also Dorothy Day and Martin Luther King. Now, this is not the same as pacifism understood as a rule against violence, in large part because it clearly challenges us to become better people and societies and engage in conflict. I define this virtue as a habit of realizing the goods of a conciliatory love that draws enemies toward friendship and the truth of our ultimate unity and equal dignity. Some corresponding practices that educational institutions can cultivate to actualize this virtue include prayer or meditation oriented to nonviolence, training and education in nonviolent peacemaking and resistance, including forming nonviolent peacemaking communities, interreligious dialogue, constructive program or social uplift with particular focus on the poor and the marginalized, conflict transformation and analysis, and restorative justice approaches, engaging in nonviolent resistance movements, unarmed civilian protection, and nonviolent civilian-based defense. Regarding the practice of forming nonviolent peacemaking communities, there's a great theologian named Emmanuel Katangale who reflects from his experience in Africa, and he calls the church to recover, quote, its identity and mission as sacrament of God's peaceable kingdom, unquote. He argues that the church communities must go beyond recommendations for reconciliation and peaceful coexistence. Instead, they must articulate and live an explicit vision of the church as a peaceable and nonviolent community. In the context of such communities, we can better engage conflict transformation, which includes attention to personal, relational, structural, and cultural dimensions of conflict. Constructive conflict is not problematic and something merely to manage or resolve, but rather is a creative opportunity for growth or transformation. In contrast, conflict management or conflict resolution approaches too often yield short-lived peace agreements between elites or violent responses of domination, as the roots of the conflict are often left unaddressed. For example, the violent responses may take the form of police repression to a nonviolent social movement, since they are so-called, quote, stirring up conflict, and the conflict needs so-called, quote, managed, or the form of lethal military actions to so-called resolve a conflict. Indeed, the approach to conflict as being potentially creative and constructive is important for understanding the power and strategic effectiveness of nonviolent resistance. Gene Sharp has identified key sources of power and pillars of support of oppressive regimes, which nonviolent resistance movements should strategically focus on. In this approach, the resistance can achieve its political goals and shift power away from the oppressor, even without a change of heart by the oppressor. Recent history has demonstrated that this has worked against some of the most ruthless leaders, such as Milosevic in Serbia, Marcos in the Philippines, Pinochet in Chile, along with repressive systems such as the Soviet Union and apartheid in South Africa. In fact, recent research has discovered that contemporary nonviolent resistance movements have been twice as successful in achieving their political objectives as violent revolutions. Even more telling, successful nonviolent movements have led to durable democracies at least 10 times, some argue 30 times more often than so-called successful violent revolutions. To the degree such nonviolent resistance movements become integrated with the virtue of nonviolent peacemaking, I suggest their success would be even higher, especially regarding durable democracy and, more significantly, a sustainable, just peace. Unarmed civilian protection entails an outside party intervening in a conflict as nonpartisan actors, with compassion for all parties without violence, with the aim of diffusing violence and of creating a space for reconciliation and peace building. Now, this proven practice includes tactics such as protective presence and accompaniment, proactive engagement with armed actors, physical interposition, monitoring, documenting, modeling nonviolent behavior, connecting local persons to national and international resources. For example, 2 unarmed nonviolent peace force officers directly saved 14 women and children during an armed militia raid in South Sudan, when they courageously refused on 3 separate occasions to obey the militia's orders to leave the hut where the women and children were staying. In addition, when they accompanied women to get firewood or water in South Sudan because the women were regularly getting sexually assaulted or raped by armed actors from all groups in the area, these nonviolent peace force officers reduced these incidents from regularity to 0 in those areas. Further, in the US and even in other countries, Cure Violence has hired credible neighborhood messengers and interrupters who have lowered shootings and homicides by 40 to 70%, and even down 88% in Honduras. Some of the 43 organizations that offer unarmed civilian protection also include Peace Brigades International, Christian Peacemaker Teams, Meta Peace Team, and Operation Dove, which is a Catholic version. Now, the virtue of nonviolent peacemaking would also uplift other related virtues such as mercy, humility, compassion, empathy, solidarity, and hospitality, as well as qualify key virtues such as courage and justice. Jim Keenan describes mercy as the willingness to enter into the chaos of another so as to answer them in their need. Lisa Soul Cahill explains the experience of being loved and forgiven by God evokes a commitment to embody the reign of God, quote, so fully that mercy, forgiveness, and compassion precludes the very contemplation of doing violence to another person. She challenges the claim we can love our enemies while we kill them. Further, she argues that nonviolence and the unwillingness to harm seem virtually required by the essential Christian virtues such as compassion. The virtue of nonviolence would qualify the virtue of justice to focus more clearly on restorative justice with the ultimate intention toward friendship or partnership. Some corresponding practices for the virtue of justice would include non-cooperation with injustice, truth and reconciliation commissions, and ending the death penalty. The virtue of nonviolence would clarify and expand the virtue of courage to the practice of suffering out of reverence for the dignity of others and self by risking, perhaps even giving one's life without killing. This is because killing distorts our dignity by shifting us away from the logic of gift to the logic of possessiveness, by reducing empathy, and by generating trauma for all stakeholders. For instance, it's my understanding that in the 1980s, some Filipinos of the People Power movement often used the word aledango for nonviolence, which translates as offer dignity too. This appears to signal that violence in itself obscures the dignity of both victim and perpetrator, and thus by offering dignity through active nonviolence, one cultivated this virtue of courage. So we can educate and help cultivate these virtues in our universities in a variety of ways. One of the main ways is regular encounter and relationship with marginalized or oppressed persons or communities. For instance, Jesus ate meals with and directly interacted with such persons while calling his disciples to do likewise. This often enables us to better see the reality of injustice and violence. When we better see such reality, we are better enabled to reflect, imagine, and make wise judgments about liberating and transformative action. Such imagination, or what John Paul Lederer calls the moral imagination, is key to the capacity to acquire just peace virtues. He defines the moral imagination as, quote, the capacity to imagine something rooted in the challenges of the real world, yet capable of giving birth to that which does not yet exist. Lederer argues that transcending violence is forged by the capacity to generate, mobilize, and build the moral imagination. In the scriptural story of the woman accused of adultery, Jesus models moral imagination when he calmly kneels, draws on the ground, and says, "Who here is without sin? Throw the first stone." The logic of dehumanization is broken as they all put down their stones. For Lederer, mobilizing the moral imagination consists in practicing 4 disciplines. 1, the capacity to imagine ourselves in a web of relationships that includes our enemies. 2, the ability to sustain a paradoxical curiosity that embraces complexity without reliance on a dualistic polarity. 3, a belief in and pursuit of the creative act as always possible, permanently in reach and always accessible. And 4, acceptance of the inherent risk of stepping into the mystery of the unknown that lies beyond the far too familiar landscape of violence. Thus, such training should provide intentional space in both process and intervention for the artistic side and listening to the inner voice with disciplines such as journaling, storytelling, poetry, painting, drawing, music, and dance. Other virtue-forming practices also include more direct spiritual practices such as meditation on scripture, which helps to tutor the emotions. Spoon describes this practice of meditation in 4 parts: focus, taking part in the story, savoring the scene, and conversing with God, or silence. Other key spiritual practices that help us acquire just peace virtues include discernment of the spirits and participating in the Eucharist. Discernment helps to broaden our wisdom, correct our perception to act in accord with virtue. And the Eucharist fosters a relational identification with Jesus, which forms our identity and can enable a virtuous character associated with an integrated life. And finally, another key method to cultivate these virtues is when we have companions or friends who model these virtues. This is also why virtue often develops in a healthy and constructive community, such as some intentional communities, particularly on campus. So, what are some educational structures that can help contribute to cultivating these virtues? At Georgetown University, we have some intentional living communities like a social justice community. A school could develop a nonviolence community or create a Pax Christi group. There are courses on nonviolence that can be offered at all levels of education. Jasmin gave a number of examples. At Georgetown, we have a major in justice and peace studies. There could be majors in nonviolence studies. In these majors, we have required courses. Every student has to take nonviolent theory and practice and conflict transformation. Those could also be required in such majors. There could be many skill courses. These are 1-credit courses for us here at Georgetown, as opposed to a full 3-credit course on nonviolent communication, just peace advocacy, restorative circles. As mentioned, there's a book called the Just Peace Ethic Primer that includes a number of case studies that can fit well for a just peace advocacy course or a course on nonviolent theory and practice or conflict transformation. These cases explore how to draw on a nonviolent just peace ethic to transform a number of really difficult conflicts, like the civil war in South Sudan, dealing with ISIS in Iraq, gang violence in El Salvador, and there's also a case in this book on women's engagement in Track 2 diplomacy of the Mindanao peace process by Dr. Jasmin. So finally, we can also develop nonviolent skill training. For example, at Georgetown, we pretty regularly offer trainings in nonviolent communication, bystander intervention, unarmed civilian protection, and restorative circles. There's also a family engagement workbook that we have at the dcpeacesteam.com website. Now I'll put a link to that in the chat after the talk. There's peace education and parenting materials at the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative website, nonviolencejustpeace.net, for all the different ages and levels of schools. A Just Peace leadership program is another structure that could be developed. It would be a combination of courses, skill training, internships, where students said or felt called to becoming leaders in just peace or nonviolence. And then finally, a university peace team. Each university could have their own group that offers some of these skill trainings, prepares to deploy unarmed protection units to political demonstrations, contentious events on campus, hostile spots in the nearby neighborhood, and starts to model and create the imagination for alternative community protection. This peace team could also offer restorative circles for the university or the campus. So I thank you so much for your time. There's my contact email. We also welcome anyone who's really interested in advancing the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative in schools and education. We have an education committee. We would love to explore you possibly being part of that if you're interested. So peace be with you all. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCarthy, for sharing with us what schools can do to promote nonviolence. Our next speaker will talk to us about how Catholic universities and colleges can play a key role in mainstreaming nonviolence in the church and the world by integrating nonviolence in their mission, curricula, and culture. He's a senior lecturer in the Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies program at DePaul University in Chicago, USA. He's also an affiliate faculty in the DePaul University Catholic Studies Department. He has published 7 books, including Pilgrimage Through a Burning World, Spiritual Practice and Nonviolent Protest at the Nevada Test Site, and Nonviolent Lives and From Violence to Wholeness. He earned his PhD in the Historical and Cultural Studies of Religions at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, where he researched nonviolence in a range of religious traditions. Since the 1980s, he has worked in a series of movements for social change and was founder and national coordinator of the Pledge of Resistance, which for nearly a decade mobilized nonviolent action for peace and justice in Central America. In all of his work, he was inspired by the people power movement in the Philippines. Since 1990, he has worked with the Peace Bene Nonviolence Service, which has trained tens of thousands of people in the power of nonviolent change. He serves on the executive committee of Pax Christi International's Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, which has co-sponsored with the Vatican 2 landmark conferences on nonviolence, exploring the possibility of the Catholic Church actively advancing nonviolence in the church and in the world. Let us welcome from DePaul University, Dr. Ken Butigan. Let's give him a virtual applause.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great privilege to join in this critically important conference on nonviolence and to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines. I'm especially grateful for the opportunity to honor all the ways that the Philippines have lived and shared with the world the power of active nonviolence. Peace education, as we heard from Dr. Jasmin, is an important part of your society, and I only wish my own country, the United States, were as advanced as the Philippines in this regard. Of course, key to all of this, from my perspective, was the People Power movement that ended the Marcos regime in 1986, where as many as 2 million people peacefully but forcefully removed the dictator through active, creative, challenging, audacious, liberating nonviolence. As you know so much better than me, EDSA 1 was followed by EDSA 2 and EDSA 3, which illuminates how deeply this power has rooted itself in your society. Speaking personally, your movement for liberation had an enormous impact on me. I was just beginning my life. I was a baby activist at that time, learning that cardinal sin had called on the people, Catholic and non-Catholic across the country, to rise up and to use active and creative nonviolence to withdraw their consent from the regime and to create something new was deeply changing and transforming, life-changing for me. I learned that people power exists. And I also learned that we can reach back to the roots of Jesus's nonviolence and take Jesus seriously, that we can love our enemies and we can create justice at the same time. You inspired me through these revelations of faithful and embodied nonviolence. And of course, one of the great lessons of the People Power Revolution was the importance of nonviolence education and training. Hundreds of trainings happened across your country, preparing people to organize those 2 million people to go to EDSA. And the importance of nonviolence and nonviolence education is critical. And this is what I want to reflect with you for the next few minutes on. What would it be like if everyone across the planet got the training that those who went to EDSA the first time got? What if all of our schools, high schools, colleges, universities were as on point like Miriam College? What if we were all getting this training? So I want to lift up something that happened beginning about 2 years ago. In April 2019, Pope Francis hosted a 2-day spiritual retreat for the president of South Sudan and the opposition leaders of that country. The previous fall, as a historic peace agreement had been signed, but the parties had been having difficulty implementing it. There was a grave danger that this new country would again be plunged into civil war, a conflict that had already cost nearly 400,000 lives. Pope Francis called all the warring parties together to this spiritual retreat at the Vatican. It was an opportunity for dialogue and renewing the task of working for peace for the 13 million people of South Sudan. At the end of this gathering, Pope Francis pleaded with the leaders to honor the armistice they had signed and to work together as one government. And then he threw away his script. And in those unscripted remarks, he said, I beg you as a brother to stay the course of peace. I appeal to you with all my heart. Move ahead as one. Give up all your arguments, come together as one. Then, unexpectedly, he stooped down and kneeling on the floor, kissed the feet of President Salva Kiir and those of the opposition leaders. He stunned his guests with this altogether surprising gesture. I was shocked and I trembled when His Holiness the Pope kissed our feet, the president told the South Sudanese parliament a month later. While there have continued to be serious ups and downs in South Sudan since then, this past February, the parties finally formed a unity government. I am inviting all of us to let that story sink in and to say, how do we see that our students, those who are the next generation, get the kind of education and training that would lead them to do that exercise of what Dr. McCarthy called the moral imagination and the risky imagination and the embodied imagination of nonviolence in action, opening the possibilities where there were no possibilities before. So what I'm going to invite us to do is to reflect on those possibilities. And I want to show you a little clip, a video clip of Cristina Leaño. She's the associate director of the Global Catholic Climate Movement. She's a Filipina American organizer in the United States who is reflecting on the importance of that kind of nonviolence education.
As a Catholic and as somebody who was interested in spirituality, always felt a split between kind of this desire for growing in relationship with God to this commitment to addressing like inequalities in the world. And so in this class on active nonviolence, where I was learning about how this interior work of working towards communion with God and others was linked to addressing systemic changes through the power of nonviolence, it just was like such a kind of eye-opener, heart opener for me to realize that active nonviolence was articulating a framework and a philosophy that I had been trying to grapple with on my own, but that there was actually a whole like history of active nonviolence, you know, from Gandhi, from Jesus, all the way up to the different civil rights movements, social movements of today.
So what is Christina Leaño telling us? She's saying it was eye-opening. It was life-changing to have the space, in this case, I believe it was graduate school, where she heard that there was a way of connecting her spirituality with her desire for social justice. And it was in all the ways that we're talking about in terms of active and creative nonviolence. She's stressing the importance of the comprehensiveness of nonviolence, that nonviolence is not running away from violence, it's not accommodating or going along with it, and it's not fighting violence with violence. It's a way of life, it's a force for social change, and it's a universal ethic for transforming the world. More specifically even, nonviolence is a constructive force, an active method, and a courageous way of life rooted in the power of love that challenges violence without using violence, transforms and resolves conflict, and seeks justice, peace, and reconciliation for all. How can, in our own lives and in the lives of our fellow teachers, our students, the parents, our communities, how can we all get this sense of we have more power than we think? The way people in Edsa did, the way that Pope Francis dramatically used that active power of nonviolence. We have it at our disposal. As we've heard in our presentations today, violence is utterly opposed to the gospel, and nonviolence is at the heart of the gospel. Pope Benedict XVI has written, "This is what shows us the true face of God, that violence never comes from God, never helps bring anything good, but is a destructive means and not the path to escape difficulties. This is Jesus's true message. Seek peace with the means of peace and leave violence aside." And our challenge is, how can we bring that calling that's been there for 2,000 years to take that really, really seriously at a time we're at such a crossroads as a planet, as a country, as a community, as families, in our relationships and in our relationship with ourselves? How can we take that seriously, that sense of that power that we have? Well, Catholic educational institutions have a special role in integrating the peace and nonviolence that's possible in the church and the world. We have an unparalleled opportunity not just to teach about peace and nonviolence, but to be a culture of nonviolence, as we heard is happening at Miriam College. All of us can see that culture of peace come alive in our institutions. The added value that nonviolence can bring to all the good things that the university or the high school or the grade school already does includes promoting the norms of the nonviolent life, advancing an unmistakable stand against the culture of violence, evincing a firm commitment to the nonviolent shift that the world so desperately needs, equipping students with spiritual grounding, knowledge, tools, and experiences of nonviolent options and strategies to do no harm. Like in my school, all the students in the entire university have to take 25 hours of experiential learning with a community-based organization before they graduate. Promoting quantitative and qualitative research on nonviolence and nonviolent methods for personal transformations and social change, and advancing the discipline of peace and nonviolence studies. Our universities and colleges and high schools and grade schools have the opportunity to prepare a new generation of nonviolent practitioners to tackle the monumental challenges of our time. For example, a university's commitment to teaching, researching, and activating the principles of and strategy of nonviolence will support the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the commitments that the nations of the world made in 2015 to achieve enormous change by 2030 for the well-being of the planet and its inhabitants, including dramatically alleviating poverty, war, hunger, inequality, dramatically spreading quality education and healthcare, dramatically promoting gender equality and economic growth, and dramatically tackling the climate crisis. None of these goals will be achieved by violence. They require the strategies of nonviolence, nonviolent communication, conflict transformation, restorative justice, anti-racism training, intersectional analysis, movement building, and what Gandhi called, as Dr. McCarthy mentioned, the constructive program. So here are some things that we can do in our institutions. Nonviolent values and mission, departments and programs, and research. So nonviolent values and mission. So at my university, DePaul University, it's right now going through a 2-year process to revise its mission statement. What is the mission and value that it holds for its work? And there is a really great possibility that nonviolence is going to be integrated into that mission statement of the university, because that's the roadmap, that's the framework. And if that is true, then it begins to affect everything throughout the university. At its most comprehensive, Catholic educational institutions should consider initiating a fundamental review of their missions and values, the foundations which guide its directions and decisions. Does the current mission at your institution challenge the global structure of violence and support the emergence of a more just, peaceful, and nonviolent world? If not, I invite you to have a conversation in your institution about integrating nonviolence, active, creative, challenging, audacious nonviolence as a core value, and to adjust the mission to concretely guide the decisions about programming. Naming matters. Explicitly establishing peace and nonviolence as a core value of the university can have wide impacts on all your programming and activities, and also on all those students. In my university, 25,000 students could be coming away with a vision and toolbox of active and creative nonviolence for whatever walk of life they take. Secondly, departments and programs. Undertaking such a comprehensive process could help shape concrete decisions that universities or high schools or grade schools could make. For example, establishing nonviolence and peace studies departments, offering undergraduate majors and minors, launching graduate programs offering master's and doctoral degrees. Some Catholic universities have already established these programs, and others are moving in this direction. I highly encourage having a conversation wherever you're at to see if those kinds of programs can be established. Such a shift is not easy. At DePaul, it took us 10 years to establish first a minor in peace, justice, and conflict studies, and then a major. That's the program I work in. We're trying to integrate that into our DePaul or Vincentian values. Such a paradigm swerve can take an overarching vision and institutional structures to buy-ins from departments, new research agendas, dedicated students, administration, and faculty. As challenging as it can be, it can have powerful impacts. Most of my students tell me that before taking such courses, they had never been aware of the nonviolent power they have, of the nonviolent alternatives that are available, of the history of effective nonviolence, or the powerful nonviolent effort taking place right now all around the world, including in the Philippines that we've heard about today. Usually when students find out that they have this power, their capacity as a human being opens up in powerful, powerful ways. Finally, research. In addition to teaching, universities can promote critically needed peace and nonviolence research. We need a proliferation of research on the history, phenomena, methods, and effectiveness of peace and nonviolence strategies. Building on the growing data sets of nonviolence for social change, the university can contribute to a comprehensive tracking and evaluation of historic and contemporary nonviolent initiatives for justice and peace. And we know that when those different lenses are put on and we start seeing nonviolence, we start to see it everywhere, that it's actually been throughout our history. As Gandhi says, nonviolence is as old as the hills. Finally, while we can pass laws against violence, we can't pass laws mandating nonviolence. Instead, we have to build a culture where the nonviolent option is credible, documented, told, learned, and activated. In its own way, the church is increasingly fostering such a culture. But what's the church? It includes all of our universities, high schools, colleges, grade schools. They have an essential role in doing this. I've been privileged to teach over 100 college courses on nonviolence in my career at several universities, facilitate about 200 trainings and workshops in all of these settings. It has been very moving to see students and participants discover and deepen their power to live more nonviolent lives. By explicitly and deliberately naming and embracing nonviolence as a core value, universities, high schools, grade schools will be even more fully fulfilling their responsibility to nurture the whole person, equipped for our times, and to contribute even more sharply to fostering a world that relieves suffering and pursues peace, justice, and well-being for all. Thank you.
back. Welcome to the question and answer portion of this webinar. Before I proceed, may I just remind you again that you will receive the certificate of attendance only upon completion of the evaluation form. The link is already posted in the comment section of this page and on our YouTube channel. Again, please note that the link will be live only after this webinar up to 5 p.m. today. Again, only up to 5 p.m. today. We encourage you to answer the evaluation form and you will receive your certificate of attendance within the next 3 to 5 days. Please note that the PowerPoint slides of all webinars of CEAP are made available at the CEAP website at www.ceap.org.ph. They will be ready for downloading. So the materials of the past webinars are already there, and we will also upload the ones that we use today, including some of the links that our resource persons forwarded to us, like the website of the Catholic Nonviolence Initiatives. So let us now begin. But before I ask the first question, I would like to read some of the comments from Precious Colog, simple and straightforward, yet so educative and challenging. Thank you very much. God bless you. From Adi Isidro, of course, from Miriam College, we feel so proud listening to Dr. Galace, one of our mentors in life and in peace education. Peace from Miriam College. From Zenaida Sadiwa, good morning. Very informative. Watching from the University of Perpetual Help in Molino. Actually, we have viewers all the way from the northern part of the Philippines to the southern part of the Philippines. From Sister Ging Villador, wow, very inspiring presentation of active nonviolence processes. From Bessie Ann Cabanero, thank you very much for this very informative and comprehensive topic. CEAP. Your series of webinars will truly make us understand JEEPGY better, especially how it will be done in schools. Okay? So, Dr. Jas, we would like to inform you, you mentioned about your certificate program on peace and conflict resolution. Actually, CEAP sent some participants from the different regions, because we really want to help in this in the peace initiatives. And in fact, Father Tom Avila, our Region 11 trustee, is watching from Marinol High School in Asuncion, Davao. Hello, Father Tom, and he sends his hello to everyone. We'd also would like to make a shout out to our other board members watching us, Dr. June Flores of Region 2 and Sister Luz Mojica of Region 4. And I'm sure even Father Iking Balongag is also watching us from the Negros Island. Okay, so let us get the questions going. Maybe we would like to start with this, okay? Because I think it's a question that's on the mind of most of us who are listening. This is from our advocacy officer, Mr. Carlo Abadinas. How do we make sure that the message of active nonviolence is not mistaken for passivity or pacifism, but instead is a call for people to actively engage social issues in a nonviolent way? Because you know that the common narrative in our church is not to engage in issues or politics because it is not a church thing to do. So maybe your thoughts on it? Anyone who would like to answer? It's directed at the four of you. Who would like to go first?
Well, maybe I'll just start.
All right, Marie.
Obviously, that's a very important question. And it's a challenge because there is a tendency for people to hear, when they hear nonviolence, to think it implies being passive or disengaged. And I think the challenge that educators in particular have is to help people understand that the active nature of nonviolence, the depth and the variety of ways that we express a commitment to nonviolence. It's a big challenge, but a very real one. Nonviolence is very, very active.
All right. Thank you, Marie. Anyone else who would like to respond to that? Ken, Eli, or Jazz? Yes, Ken.
Right. Well, there are a whole series of stereotypes of nonviolence. One of them is passive, it's weak, it's not patriotic, or maybe it's too patriotic sometimes. That it's on the edges, it's too utopian, and what we're about is mainstreaming active, creative, challenging, audacious nonviolence. One of the reasons I shared those stories, first of all, what happened at EDSA, but then secondly, Pope Francis's nonviolent action with those warlords from Sudan, is to show, actually, when you look at when it's activated, it is very active, it's very courageous, it's very risky, it's very challenging. Uh, uh, but one thing I would invite people to recognize is that most systems of domination want to have us think little of nonviolence because they do not want us actually unleashing nonviolent power, as Marcos found out. So stereotypes, I think, are promoted by the media, by all kinds of things, to keep us from actually tapping this power.
Thank you, Ken. Yes, Jazz?
I'll bring it to the level of the classroom, and that's a very important and good question, Carlo. First of all, we remind our students that passivity is the same as not doing anything. So it is violence in itself. If we are aware that violence is happening in our midst and we don't do anything about it, if we turn a blind eye, then we contribute, to the violent act. So, for example, in the classroom, if you are people who are aware of intense bullying or any kind of bullying, and we just allow the person to suffer, then and we are not, and you have an opportunity to do something and don't actually do anything, then that's contributing to violence. So let's just not say that, well, if you remain passive and if you remain like quiet about situations of violence, then, we're also contributing to that, as I've said. So the challenge here is for us, to speak up, to do something. So, for example, in the case of the bullying incident in the schools, as a bystander, do your bit, do your part to defend the victim, to also, remind the offender of what he or she is doing. So we do not want to get pleasure from other people's pains, man. So you're all invited, to do something about situations that we see, especially in our midst.
Yeah, maybe just as a follow-up to that, Jazz, because some people they're actually afraid to tell on other people in the bullying case. So how would you reconcile that?
It's a very good question because, it's very important also for the school to have mechanisms by which bystanders can report, and for example, like a safe line or like a safe space where they can email, authorities about a situation without revealing who they are. So that's it's very important for people to have that, but for schools, or organizations to have that. So, for example, in Miriam College, we have developed a safe space email where students can report, for example, incidents of sexual harassment, or a safe line that's coming soon, where people can actually report bullying incident. So for people who are afraid, channels or mechanisms can actually be created.
Yeah, that's right. So it's very important for schools to have these mechanisms in place to actually empower students to make reports, no?
That's right.
Yeah, because people normally fear, and it's the fear that keeps them from reporting all these things. All right. Thank you, Jazz. Thank you for bringing it to the level of the schools. Maybe we can get a rejoinder from Eli.
Yeah, I was just going to add a couple points. One, I think, is the association with passivity in part is the way in which Christians have taught the story of turn the other cheek in the scripture. And I think that has permeated a lot of society, whether it be Christians or non-Christians. And you'll hear that phrase, well, I don't turn the other cheek, or why should I turn the other cheek, right? And what they think that means passivity, but if you really go back into the context and the story, you know, Jesus is inviting a marginalized, oppressed group to assert their dignity to an oppressive soldier of the Romans, and to call on him to treat them as an equal. So it's a very assertive, active kind of moment to help generate the conditions for a broader kind of nonviolent resistance movement. So Walter Wink is great for kind of unpacking that. I encourage educators to really focus in on that and tell that story in that way. The second thing is just to build on Ken's point about how associating nonviolence with passivity, it benefits certain groups, right? It benefits groups and institutions and corporations that profit off of maintaining a continual sense of kind of fear about war, about trying to have the biggest military so the other militaries can't beat you, profiting off of that ongoing arms race. Like, those are the voices and the groups that are going to keep perpetuating this idea that nonviolence is about passivity. And, you know, I think if we help students and ourselves understand that, it's not just like a misconception, you know, it intentionally functions to maintain established wealth and power in our societies. So hopefully that would motivate kind of a deeper understanding and practice of nonviolence.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you, everyone, for your very wonderful answers. Now let's move on. Also from Carlo, because we are mostly online right now, our engagements are mostly online. How does one bring active nonviolence into online engagement? Because, you know, how do we? Because a lot of our students, our faculty, they're online now. Connected to this, how do we move forward the active nonviolence agenda against the kind of culture being pushed by social media that feeds on anger and hate? Okay, so this is about online engagement, active nonviolence online engagement, because most of the feeds are actually on anger, hate, etc. Who would like to take that? It's a question for everyone. Anyone?
I can begin, man.
Right,
So I was hoping that others would, but okay. I have enumerated some examples of how we can do this advocacy online, and of course, an online learning session such as we're doing right now. You know, it's very important. So just yesterday in Miriam College, we held a learning session with our students on creating a safer learning environment. And we invited, a resource speaker who oriented them on laws like sexual harassment and safe spaces. And it was a very good exchange between our students and the resource persons, in this webinar. So that's something that, that we can do beyond, the usual classroom sessions. We also invite speakers who can speak to us about, these issues of peace and nonviolence. That the challenge, one good thing that actually online learning has done to us is that we can invite people from very far away places. So if before you cannot actually invite someone from Mindanao, from Cotabato, the commissioners of the Bangsamoro, you can actually invite them now and speak to us about how the Bangsamoro peace process is progressing. That's something also we have done during International Day of Peace in Miriam College. We have invited one of the commissioners of the Bangsamoro to speak to us about updates, on what's happening on the ground. So we're very happy that, that the peace process there is, not just the peace process, but the, peace there is wonderful. I mean, the Bangsamoro government is functioning very well. We can put up exhibits on Facebook, for example, we have put up exhibits on the commemoration of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and at the same time orient people on why, we should actually support the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. Our HEU Christian Campus Ministry Office, and Addie's here watching. Hello, Addie. So she gives out prayer cards at the beginning of every week, to all faculty and students to remind them that, hey, it's online learning, but you still need to pray before classes begin. And that can be taken as an opportunity to actually, have themes on peace and nonviolence, which just done, during International Day of Peace. And I have a long list, but I don't want to deprive our speakers of the chance also to contribute to answering this question. Man.
Thank you, Jazz. Anyone else who would like to respond to that?
Yes, I maybe just
Yes, Marie.
a very simple word, which is a reminder that truth and nonviolence are intrinsically interconnected. And I think one of the great challenges that we're facing right now is the challenge of building the skills of understanding how to sort out accurate information from disinformation, truth from lies. And I think both the practice, learning the practice as young people, as students, and that is a practice that has to last for the rest of our lives, of being truthful people is really important. But also, I think understanding how we find our way through the complexity of overwhelming information to identify sources of information that are accurate and truthful. And I think that's a great challenge for educators in helping students to do that.
Okay, thank you, Marie. Anyone else who would like to answer? Yes, Ken.
These are all really great ideas. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I'm concerned about the about cyberspace and how, as your question even indicates, how hate and fear and greed and racism and so on feeds that. And so I think it, just like at Miriam College, they have a process around safe space for identifying sexual harassment and so on. We need to build a culture of nonviolence online. And that doesn't mean there won't be a culture of violence as well. But in fact, nonviolence never pretends that we're going to get rid of violence or injustice. It's more that we're equipped for really engaging and transforming it. So I would encourage all of us watching to think about how they can contribute to the better angels of our nature online and promoting that. And so for my daughter's sake, as well as everyone else.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Now, there's a question here for Dr. Galace, for everyone actually, from Lou Agding. But there's a message for Jas. Hi, Jasmin. Nice to see you after all these years, after my days in Assumption College. A question for all speakers. How are teachers, given their own personal and psychosocial stage issues, taught in migrating and translating the active nonviolence concepts, principles, and processes in their lesson plans, regardless of the subject that they are handling? Because what subject should teach this? I think everybody. I think all teachers should be nonviolent teachers, right? So how are they supposed to be taught in translating these concepts in their lesson?
I think I mentioned some examples a while ago, just to reinforce. It's really you can look at the nonviolent expressions that are used in everyday conversations, and look at the effect of these nonviolent of these violent expressions, and then look for alternatives. Is one thing you can do. So for example, in a class, somebody says, "Okay, next bullet," and you say, "Okay, why say point instead of bullet?" If somebody says, "son of a gun," you can say, "Why do we say that?" What can be an alternative to that? So, and what are the the consequences if you say such words. Just those very simple things. When in the textbook that we use, we can actually look, at what words and what photos, are violent or unfair or unjust. So, for example, are there more depictions of men as heroes, more than women? Are there words there that are not non-inclusive, that are very exclusive, would not include women? So we can also make use of that, man. Of course, as I've said a while ago, there was a question here. It's a wonderful question. It's related to this about how a world history teacher can actually, teach a nonviolence when the world history textbook is replete with stories of war, of heroes. So my answer to that is that, when actually speaking about, for example, an episode in history of war, then you can actually do a research beyond the textbook and look at those who oppose the war. So what did people say to resist that war? So for example, if just talking about the war, in Liberia, and the textbook would also only talk about, the war, the people who perpetrated the war, then people can, the world history teacher could research beyond, what's in the textbook and see, what kind of opposition was there? Was there a nonviolent opposition? Who were the leaders of this nonviolent opposition? So it really takes a lot, also. It will really take time from this faculty, to be more, to be more creative. I mean, there's a real need for creativity as well, as well as love and commitment to the cause, if you want to teach nonviolence as well, because the history textbooks would not offer that. So these are some examples, and I've mentioned about the use of songs and poems, readings. For example, the poem of Amanda during the the installation of the president, the inauguration of Joe Biden. That's a very beautiful piece that you can actually discuss in the classroom. Talk about it. What message did it impart to the students? Because there are a lot of messages of nonviolence in that poem. So taking opportunities of the current events, what happening currently, and how do we learn from such events. So my colleagues also might want to share how we can teach grade 10 students the concept of nonviolence.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Anyone else would like to add to that?
I would just like to add a very little bit in reference to what Jasmin was saying. And that is that I think a part of the lesson that's really important is understanding what violence is. And I think we have a tendency to think of violence as physical, direct violence, and don't always notice that violence is also structural and systemic and cultural. Dr. Galace was talking about violence in language. And I think when you identify violence, that itself is a start to understanding how we might become more nonviolent.
Yeah, so it's very important that we understand what violence is really about. Yeah, right. Eli, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just to pick up on that really good point, I think when we teach, if we teach about wars in our history courses or other courses, I would challenge us also to always include the generational trauma that comes out of a war. In other words, it's not just an event in history that sort of happens in a vacuum, but it creates generational trauma, and it almost always creates cycles of violence, whether it be World War I leading to World War II, or World War II creating all these proxy wars as part of the Cold War between the Soviets and the US. There's almost always this pattern, this cycle of violence that can be identified or mapped out. And I think that's crucial to help our students and our culture kind of see that. And then you start to recognize the travesty of not only fighting in war, but sort of considering war legitimate or justified under some circumstances. I think that can really help us to understand violence. In the US, we've got a book by Howard Zinn called The People's History of the United States, where he tries to unpack history from the perspective of social movements and marginalized groups. So I don't know if there's other books like that in the Philippines or other ways to kind of do that work as well. But That's one example.
Okay, thank you, Eli. That's very interesting, for us to look at the trauma that wars cause, and that will give us an understanding of violence. Ken, would you like to add?
Yeah, I teach seniors in our major, Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies in my university, and we do our capstone course, it kind of harvesting the major, and I was really struck this past week when we were having a conversation, and almost everyone felt that all their education, 12 years and then college, and nowhere was it really focused on their well-being. It's focused on facts and learning to do exams well and so on. But they were struck by the fact that that wasn't the priority in the classroom. And I thought what Dr. Galace shared during what you shared during your presentation, I think gets at this. You said, what are really approaches? Cooperative, holistic, humanist, dialogical, participatory. I think if we actually did those kinds of practices in classrooms, beginning from right to beginning of school all the way through, students would not have that feeling of their well-being was not the priority. And so what we try to do, at least in this major, is a lot of those practices you've identified. And I just encourage anybody watching to think about, well, I'm a teacher, maybe, and how do I get those practices? Or, hey, I'm already doing that, and it's really great, in which case we want to applaud that.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Ken. Um, there are some questions here about accessing your modules. From Sister Ging Villador, Dr. Galace, how can we access the modules on integrating nonviolence in the curriculum? That's also a question for Dr. Eli. Almost the same question. How can we get these modules and bring it in our online class? Is there a way by which they can contact you, Jazz?
Yeah. Well, actually, I have here with me the Peace Education textbook, a reference material that Dr. Loretta Castro and I developed. It's called Peace Education, A Pathway to a Culture of Peace. This is actually downloadable. It's free. So you just type the title or our names, and it will already appear online. So it's very useful. So there are many tips here, teaching, learning ideas that you can use in the classroom from BEU to HEU on how to integrate peace and nonviolence in your teaching. And man, I just want to say that there was like a question about, what do we do? Our students are using, like video games that are violent. So, I suggest that you lead them, to a search on nonviolent video games, because there are so many, like for example, Gran Turismo, Flower, Minecraft, Journey, The Witness. So there are many alternatives. So tell your students, they're like, okay, I'd like you to play this game, so that they will be introduced to such game as well. Yeah, that's right. And of course, the faculty can also develop their own games. Like yesterday, we were taught in school how to use the Kahoot to develop your own games online. I think it was so fun, and you can develop like fun nonviolent games through that app. Thank you.
Thank you, Jazz. Dr. Eli, would you like to also take that on? Because someone was asking on how they can integrate into the curriculum some nonviolent initiatives.
Sure, I'd be happy to kind of talk more about that with folks. A couple sites. So the nonviolencejustpeace.net website, which is the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, has a tab for resources and peace education. It's got a number of syllabi and sort of exercises and things that can be used at all different age levels. Also, dcpeaceteam.com has that family education workbook, family engagement workbook, as well as some of the trainings I mentioned on bystander intervention and so forth. And my email is esm52@georgetown.edu if you want to kind of talk more about.
Okay, so we will post those links in the comment section of our Facebook page so you can easily access them. I think they have already been posted by our staff. So yeah, please just click on the link so that you can be directed at those sites. No? Well, it's almost 11 o'clock. I'm sure it's nearing midnight somewhere in the US right now. So we will perhaps the last question, and then I will ask you for your final message to our viewers. There's a question here: if there is already an assessment measure to find out if students have nonviolent tendencies or come from from violent based homes, because I believe in the popular statements that parents are our first teachers and the home is the first institution to teach values. So we should know the children's thoughts and feelings and background on this matter. I think this is also from Lou Agbin. Yeah. We already have that assessment tool to measure violent tendencies among students. Did any of you come across that?
Um, may I?
Yes, yes.
You know, I'm not sure if the dissertation of Dr. Loretta Castro and myself are online, but if they are, you know, they would have like instruments to measure both knowledge and attitudes of you know, students or learners in relation to peace and nonviolence. So I hope, you know, that can be accessible. And I also developed, you know, an assessment of the conflict resolution strategy or disposition, you know, of learners, and it's in a book. I'm sorry, I didn't bring a copy right now. It's called Conflict Resolution and Peer Mediation. I believe it's also available online. The title again is Conflict Resolution and Peer Mediation, and it's by me. And at the end of it, you will see there like an assessment, you know, of students or learners, you know, disposition and in facing or in facing conflict. You will see if you're like a fight person or a flight person or a person who would face your conflict constructively. So these are the things that we have developed. So I hope that, you know, you will find them online. And otherwise, Dr. Agbing, I can email that to you.
Or maybe just in your slides, maybe you can put the link
Add.
there that
Okay.
can be made references so
All
that
right.
those who will be downloading your slides, they can just copy the link later
That's
on.
right. Thanks,
Yeah.
man,
Thank
for the
you.
suggestion. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else who would like to answer if there are any assessment tools to measure violence among our students? If there are none, maybe I will ask you for your final message. You know, like what would be your message to our attendees right now? Maybe you can start with Marie.
All right. Nothing new. Violence is absolutely antithetical to the word and witness of Jesus Christ, that his vision and in vision and indeed, he is the revelation and the embodiment of the nonviolent God. That's what guides our education, we hope.
Thank you, Marie. Um, Eli, maybe we can hear from you.
I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us and to know that, you know, as educators, you have just an amazing opportunity and an amazing responsibility for the future, the next generation, where, you know, education can really be a space for transformation. So I'm honored to kind of share this space with you and be on that journey with you. I do want to offer that, you know, there are online trainings in some of these nonviolent skills that are available through Pace Bene, which Ken works with, and I work with DCP's team. We can do online training in nonviolent communication, unarmed protection, bystander intervention. So we'd be happy to, you know, share that if that's helpful in your communities, and even train people to lead such trainings if that was of interest. So peace be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. Peace be with you. Ken, would you like to say your final words?
So Dr. Martin Luther King said, the question is not nonviolence or violence. The question is nonviolence or non-existence. We have the opportunity to learn these skills, go very deeply into our calling as human beings to be nonviolent with one another, to love one another in this powerful and active way. And I am just grateful for everything that's happening in the Philippines. That's a lesson for the world on how to put this into practice. Thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for being inspired by our example in the Philippines. And sometimes it takes another person to point that out to us, that we are really an example to the world. So before I ask you, Jas, to give your final message, I have a question for you. Among the violent things that you put in your list, you cited "Drop Dead Gorgeous." Now, how do you now make that non-violent? Because I need to know how to introduce you the next time.
Man, you're ravishing. You're absolutely beautiful. I don't have to say you're drop dead gorgeous. You're ravishing. You're absolutely beautiful. That should be able to capture, that message too.
And with your spirit. All right, your message.
Well, I just, first off, I want to say thank you so much, CEAP. Thank you so much, Mary Ann. CEAP is just like home to me. And thank you to all those who took time to come here and listen to us. It's very important to us, and I hope that you find this webinar meaningful. And I just want to tell our viewers, our listeners, that nonviolence is not only a political strategy. It's not only something that we teach. It is a philosophy, it is a way of life, and our students will not be people of nonviolence if they don't see it in us. So let us be the change that we want to see in the world, as Candy said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jas. Thank you very much, Marie, Ken, and Eli. So perhaps to close this, we would just like to remind everyone that according to the Philippine Catholic School Standards, the first defining character of an excellent Catholic school is the centeredness of Christ. Christ is the foundation of all Catholic schools, and violence never comes from Christ. Peace is Jesus's true message. So as Ken already told us, we ask ourselves, how can we bring this calling from 2,000 years ago as a planet, as a country, as a community, and in our relationships with others and ourselves to our culture? We have to witness to nonviolence, right? We have to model nonviolence, as Dr. Galace said. We have to be the change that we want to see in this world. So my wish is, may we see the face of peace in each other and in ourselves as we continue to live a culture of nonviolence. Before we end, we would like to thank our partners, very amazing partners, Raxo City, our web host, and PEAC for supporting us in the webinar series for the JEEPGY conference. Please join us again tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning for our webinar organized by the Subcommittee on Poverty Reduction. That will feature programs for the poor, best practices from the Negros Island. Don't miss it. On behalf of Sister Maria Marisa Viri, our president, and the CEAP Board of Trustees, Father Iking Balongag, our vice president and programs committee chair, and the JEEPGY champions, Mr. Jose Alan Arellano, our executive director, and the CEAP National Secretariat, this is Marianne Cruz, your deputy executive director, saying thank you and good afternoon. Oh, it's the morning. Good morning.
at serbisyong totoo. Kahalintulad ni Kristo, isang puwarang Katoliko. Pagkakaisa sa tulong at gawa, masasalamat sa lahat ng alaala. Pagbabago ang misyon sa mundo, magagawa sa biyaya ni Kristo. Ang kabataan may hamon at alay sa ating bayan, maging lingkod at tulad ng pagbabago sa misyon sa mundo. Birhen Maria ang gabay at ang modelo. Sa mundong may bagong anyo, isang bansang may bagong sigla. Dahil sa ikaw at ako, natuto sa prinsipyong mundo at serbisyong